Hi, I'm Jo.
And I'm Kelly.
And this is the new Start Inspiring podcast.
If you're someone who looks after an organisation and really cares about your people, productivity and performance, this podcast is for you.
You're going to get advice and valuable insight.
We're going to bring you tools and information that you can apply directly to your business.
So if you really value your people,
listen to the Start Inspiring podcast.
Your future self is going to thank you for it. So, hello, here we are for our Halloween special. Gosh, how are we already here in October? Don't know where the year's gone.
It has gone pretty fast.
I know I spent January in Asia, but it has still gone very quickly.
Yeah, see, that's what happens when you work 11 months of the year.
Oh, I can highly recommend it. Yeah, so here we are. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
We'll be sure playing with some of these props. This is the Magic HR Book of Spells. I'm sure we're going to share some of that with you. But to start with, we're going to talk about some of the scary shit that happens in HR.
Love that title.
And really kind of thinking about so many people come to speak to us, whether that's in my in-house days or now, about, you know, how tough it is. How tough it is to lead and manage people to have a successful outcome for the organisation and for individuals. And it really made us reflect on, well, you know, why is it so scary? You know, what are we really scared of? Because is managing people really that scary?
It feels it at times, I guess. And I don't know, I wonder if leadership is a difficult job. It is a difficult job, and it's probably more difficult, but probably more rewarding as well. You know, we are no longer in the days where you are automatically respected. Perhaps that's the wrong use of word, but back in the, I'd like to think I'm not that old, but when starting my career, the gods, as they were, the leaders, they said something, you know, you said it. Okay, how high, you know, jump, how high? You know, and it wasn't, you know, we were back in the day where in retail you would get crates of things thrown at you, or you know, that used to be leadership, and it was kind of fear-inducing in some respects at times, wasn't it? Whereas now leaders, both in the organisational worlds that we work in, but also, you know, look in politics, people have a voice, and quite a lot of them use it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, leaders often quite often are scared about how do I make everybody happy? And I think the answer is not trying to treat everybody the same. It's because you can't make everybody happy if you do that.
But they think that's what it is though, don't they? They do think I've got to treat everybody equally.
Yes.
Where, of course, I'm sure we'll cover this in a much later episode, this piece around equity rather than equality.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, obviously we started our careers in very similar places.
We did.
So we both had, you know, kind of area visits, and the store manager would arrive, and I can remember feeling fearful of what they might say.
Well, interviews even used to be like that, didn't they? Like, right, what can we catch them out for?
Oh, yeah. How many times have you heard, do you want to be good cop in this interview or shall I?
Rather than actually, how do we get the very best out of our people?
Yeah.
And our future potential people.
Yeah.
Of course, yes, still checking and ensuring that they've got the capabilities. But yeah, I think leadership has evolved, but I think we are in danger of going too far the other way. Yeah. Whereas leaders or managers, we are scared to have the conversations that need to be had. Maybe scared to tackle things or for fear of perhaps something happening as a result of that, as the leader. You know, what is okay to say, what isn't okay to say. So I think that's a lot of what we're dealing with right now. And in the end, I think it comes down to trust. You know, everything I distill, everything you and I talk about, it's like, where does the trust sit in the relationship between two individuals, or a leader and their line managers, or the leader and their team? And quite often it is our relationship strong enough, good enough, that A, you understand me, and B, we can lean into those difficult conversations.
I love the term lean in. I use it such a lot, actually, in home life as well as in work. But that piece around, if it feels a bit uncomfortable, lean into it. It either means you're going to grow and learn something new, or it means you're going to receive insight that you didn't have before. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be, bad or have a negative impact on you as a human. It just means I'm going to stop, I'm going to lean in, and I'm just going to allow myself to feel what is going to come as a result of that. But it is interesting, isn't it? That fear of repercussion, that fear of, if I get this wrong, what might happen?
Yeah.
Which kind of comes to a whole piece around psychological safety, and are we creating it? The cornerstone, of course, being trust.
Yeah.
And, what sort of culture am I creating in an organisation? So speaking as a leader, what type of culture am I creating which enables the people in the organisation to do their best work, be their best selves, bring their best selves to work every day?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it can fall over so easily.
And I think the reality is, if there is friction in, that's my terminology, but if there's friction or something isn't making you happy, the only thing that's certain is by doing nothing,
it's going
to stay. It's not going to change. So quite often we make assumptions that leaning in is going to be harder. But actually, I quite often talk to leaders and say, how long has this thing been an issue? Oh, probably been talking about it for the last 3 months. Okay. If we had the conversation that needed to take place, how long would that take you? Possibly half an hour to prep, probably half an hour to hold. And how long is the fallout of that likely to last? Worst case,
a few days.
Okay, but you've been harboring this as a team for 3 months. We know from Google. So Google did a project, Aristotle, and they were really trying to find what is the key components or team that creates the highest performance. And they mixed A players, they mixed, all different capabilities, qualities. They couldn't find the reason some teams were succeeded and some weren't until they stumbled across psychological safety and trust. And in all of the teams that had the highest performance, they had strong enough psychological safety and trust to lean in and have the conversations that needed to take place. And we do a lot of work with Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions, because quite often the dysfunction is we don't have the foundation of trust. And Lencioni talks about, if you don't have trust, you will avoid conflict and debate.
Absolutely.
If you avoid conflict and debate, you can't get commitment, because we didn't agree to this. How many meetings have you been in where something was agreed and then nothing happens? Well, that's probably because there was some unsaid stuff in the meeting. So how do you create the environment to talk about the unsaid stuff and have that healthy debate so that you can, in the words of Amazon, if you like, you can disagree and then commit?
Yeah.
Once you've got commitment, you can, and trust, by the way, you can hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
And it's then that you get the fruits of that labour. You get high performance and an attention to results. So it kind of, I know we talk a lot about trust, don't we, in our work, but that is the foundation of high performance.
Well, you know it when you've got it, and you know it when you don't.
We've all worked on a team, right?
All worked on a team.
both
sides, both things that have happened. And I think certainly as a leader, I was using the Lenicioni piece even in my work, in my practice, and would do lots of exercises with my direct reports to try and build trust, and help us as a team to work through. Conflict is always such a interesting word, isn't it? Because I think it conjures. Hey, little Halloween reference there. It conjures up views of, well, actually getting heated, it becoming a, out of control type of conflict, where actually we're talking about healthy conflict. We're talking about the ability to be able to talk through something without those emotions becoming heightened. Because actually I know that I'm safe to discuss it. And I'm safe to give my view, and it's okay if we don't see the world the same way.
Yeah.
Because what comes
Absolutely.
out of that is something much better than I might have created on my own. And you are creating that safe space for
Yeah.
other people to be their best. And why would you not want that?
Absolutely. And I want something that comes to mind when you talk to that, though, is actually how do we go into those discussions? And are we going into them to win? Because if we go in to win a conversation, and I see this a lot on social media now as well,
Yeah.
right? So we have a very strong opinion and we're going in to share our opinion because of course we're seeing it through our lens and we believe we are right. And of course that can be true.
Mm.
But if we go into these conversations organizationally with a level of curiosity
Yeah,
to say,
nice.
here's what I'm experiencing. And by the way, leaders, you are paying these people to come to work and do a good job. You are okay demanding and expecting that they do. But when they aren't, getting curious about why they aren't and not going in there, because if I need to win, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
And I just don't think on a team that needs to be the case. Actually, what's the win-win solution here?
Yeah.
Because the truth of the matter is probably something isn't happening that should be.
Yeah.
So let's state the fact, what's not happening, and then let's get curious about why it's not happening.
Yeah.
And once we understand that, let's decide what we're going to do about it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the structure of the what, the so what now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can do all of that with care, right? So be curious, but you act with care.
Yeah.
So, we use Radical Candor in our LDP program.
We do.
That great book from Kim Scott, and that piece around actually I'm going to give this feedback, but I'm giving it from a place of care and love because I actually care about our relationship.
Yeah.
Because when you've got trust, that's exactly what happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've moved past transacting as colleagues and passing work between you.
Yeah.
You've actually built a relationship with those other people or that other person.
Absolutely. And earlier you talked about culture, and I love that Netflix talk about a no blame culture.
Yeah.
And I think that comes into this trust and psychological safety as well, which is, so psychological safety is not about this soft fluffy stuff. Let's get that clear. It's about, do I feel comfortable enough to take risk? Do I feel comfortable to have an opinion? Am I able to say what I'm thinking and feel heard, seen, heard and recognized?
Yeah.
Netflix don't allow people to talk about other people. So if I came to you as a leader and said, Joe Bloggs is irritating me, here's what he or she isn't doing or they aren't doing, the first thing the manager would say is, have you told them?
Have you spoken to them? Yeah.
Have you spoken to them?
Absolutely right.
And if you haven't, what's stopping you
Yeah.
talking to them? Because it might be, actually, I don't feel confident and comfortable. Okay, how can I help you get the confidence and comfort to be able to have that conversation?
Absolutely.
And passing that back so that you create a culture that is honest and authentic. And that's the sweet spot for high performance, is kind of that, I talk about it a lot, that psychological safety and accountability.
Yeah.
If you have neither, you have apathy. So
Yeah.
nobody wants everybody rolling around in apathy.
No.
If you have psychological safety, so high levels of psychological safety and no accountability, you'll end up with your team in the comfort zone.
Yeah.
And actually, that's not that engaging and motivating after a while. I mean, how many of you have been in a job that you've outgrown and therefore it is not challenging you anymore?
You're basically doing it in your sleep, aren't you? It's
Right.
just happening.
And as human beings, we want to be challenged.
Yeah, we do.
So you have to have that kind of intersection of psychological safety and accountability.
Yeah.
Too much accountability, by the way, and no psychological safety.
Absolutely.
Anxiety and burnout.
Yeah.
So we don't want that either.
No.
But we want to work in an organisation and for a leader who we trust
Yeah.
and has got our back.
Yeah.
But we also know we can't mess around.
We're going to be held accountable.
Yeah, we've got a job to do. That's what my contract says. I'm being paid to do this job and I'm being paid to do it really well.
Yeah.
And by the way, my future career opportunities also lie in, going on above and beyond and doing a great job.
Yeah.
And so much sits with me as an individual to be able to create that high performance. But yeah, we have to do those two things as leaders.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like this piece around the apathy zone and the comfort zone. And because you can absolutely see that happening, can't you, in organisations and teams, and that ability to get that right. Because I think there's such a lot for leaders about create happy people, you get a happy customer. it's not true, but of course happiness comes in many forms.
I think it's different than engagement.
So do I.
Personally.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah.
It is different.
Yeah. What do you see as the difference?
I think for me, engagement is all about having clarity, knowing exactly what's expected of me, that I've got the tools or I'm developing my tools to do the job to the best of my ability. And I'm motivated and excited, and I will go out of my way to do the best job I can do for. It's not just about the organisation, is it? It's actually about the customer.
Yeah.
And my teammates.
Yes.
And knowing that I'm doing a good job for them. And so engagement is a kind of a culminative effect of all of that, really. It's about how you feel, how much additional effort you're then going to put in. It means that at 5 o'clock, I don't kind of go, right, that's me done. I don't give it another thought. And that isn't always just about, did that person work later, or did that person, but are my outputs good?
Yeah.
Do I always consistently deliver?
Yeah.
And that's how I want to be measured.
And do I care about my teammates?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do I care enough to do
a good job? Because there's can't be anything worse than leaving your teammates.
But then that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think about nobody comes to work to do a bad job intentionally, but the environment might not help them. And you said earlier about treating people equally. And actually, I think you can treat people with trust and there still be a different outcome.
Yeah.
So, I remember really early days thinking about, things like, actually we had a situation where a husband and wife had both been off absent. Both had flu, I think, at the time, a long time ago. But actually, we ended up giving one a warning and one not. And there was a bit of a hoo-ha in the organisation because the outcome was different.
Yeah.
But we were really able to explain that we had treated them fairly. The one that got a warning, it wasn't the first time they'd been off. They'd been off several times that had culminated in that.
Yeah.
It wasn't the individual instance itself. So I think as leaders, if we can explain our rationale for making decisions and we are fair, I think you can have different outcomes. And to your piece about equity, leveling that playing field might mean that you do something slightly different because what you're doing is applying an individual lens. And I think that, we talk about that a bit, don't we?
Yeah, so important.
We have individual human beings work for us.
Absolutely. They don't want to feel like a number.
No.
They don't want to feel like a number. They want to feel like their experience is individualised as much as possible. And of course, if you've 1,000 people, that's incredibly difficult. But all of that comes down to good leadership, good managers, real strength and ability to be able to create a great place to work.
Yeah.
And that all starts with psychological safety and trust, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk a lot about, sorry, leaders, but all roads lead to you. Individuals do need to take responsibility for their jobs. We're paying, these are adults. But where things aren't working, it is the leader's responsibility to address it.
Yeah.
And so should we talk about some of the scary shit that we've experienced in some of the conversations that we've had, that people might be sitting here thinking, I've got to have one of these conversations. I know it in my gut, but I'm not doing it. And maybe give people some advice around how to go about it, and maybe what some of the outcomes were when, even you and I in the day were probably going into it going, okay, this could go one way or the other. But what we know is it's our role as a leader to lean into it, to not ignore it, because ignoring it means it will continue to fester.
Yeah.
And if it continues to fester, actually that has a much greater impact on your culture, your organisational culture. So role model the behaviours you want to see.
Yeah. So if you're enjoying this episode, we'd love to hear from you. So give us a like or share our podcast with others. I'll let you enjoy the rest of the episode.
So what's your scariest example?
So I think often most managers have come to me over the course of years about behavioural issues. They tend to find performance issues maybe easier, not 100% easier, but maybe easier because there's something objective that exists. Whereas I think for behavioural challenges, they'll tend to kind of say, oh, but it's just so personal. Like it feels like I'm making this personal. And And I think it's just interesting, isn't it? Because it is definitely the hardest thing to change. You know, you think about when we've worked with leadership teams, etc. If you get behavioural change, you know you're on the right road.
Yes.
And I suppose the leaning in a behavioural type challenge is that piece around honesty and, you know, giving good examples. We use CORN, don't we, in our leadership development. So CORN is a model that you can use to give feedback, and the C is for context, the O is for R is for result, and N is for next steps. And so you would essentially talk about the context of what's happened is, you know, I saw this behaviour or that behaviour. I noticed in a meeting that, you know, you closed someone else down when it was their turn to speak. Whatever the context might be, you prepare for your examples of that context. And then you then use observe to say, so what I observed was when you know, cut that person down in the meeting, that person then retreated and they didn't speak again.
Yeah.
And that means we didn't hear their valuable reflections on that issue, and we just heard your voice. And you're adding the depth of your observations to it. And it's always really important that they are your observations and that these are things that you're noticing, because you're able to then really give that honest but kind reflections on what's happened. And I think really seeking their, you know, what are your observations of what I've talked about? Because actually I might be seeing something that doesn't exist, or actually there might be a genuine challenge for the employee.
Yes.
And then they bring their observations to the fore, in which point you have an opportunity to do more listening and understanding of their circumstances.
Absolutely. So we find in coaching on a regular basis that the real issue isn't the real issue.
Yeah.
And there's far more, you know, human beings, relationships, there's far more at play. And
Absolutely.
So understanding that
yeah,
is really helpful.
Definitely. And I think in that observation space, you are able to not only listen to what the person's saying, but really observe their language and what they're telling you. And do those things align?
Yeah.
To the point where almost asking more questions might be required. So, I mean, it depends on your relationship, but if it's bold enough, you might say, your face isn't telling me what you've just told me, or that's not what I'm getting from your body language. I'm feeling like there's more to talk about.
Yes.
You know, let's talk.
Yeah.
Obviously, you could ask the same question a couple of times. You know, not just are you okay, but then go again with, are you really okay? Because I'm sensing there's something more here. And then really what's the result we want to see in the future? So how do we come to a common ground where the feedback the manager might be giving is landing, but also we've explored all the other extenuating circumstances.
Yeah.
And then we set some next steps.
Lovely.
So nice. Such a easy way to prepare, good way to remember, you know, 4 very easy steps. So as a gift for you to take away today.
Yeah. And I think when it's done well, it really has some very positive results. I mean, I don't know about you, but, you know, I've certainly had some really strong feedback in my career, and I'm so grateful that someone took the time to bring my attention to things I didn't know about. You know, and in Kim Scott's radical candor model that we talked about, if you care about people and don't give them the feedback, that's actually ruinous empathy. You know, it's never ever gonna end well for anybody. And so I'm so grateful for some of the difficult feedback I've had. One of those, if I think about it, and I've just done that, so that's really interesting, is when I used to present at board meetings, I would say a lot. I didn't realise that. I wasn't aware of it. It was definitely a blind spot for me. And the individual that brought it to my attention said, you know, so here's the context. We're at board meeting. Every other word that comes out of your mouth is My observation is that makes you appear quite nervous, and actually damages, I mean, they were pretty frank, damages your credibility in your presentation. Almost the message that you want to share is lost, because we're like worried about you. You're saying a lot, and actually for some people it was difficult to concentrate. So the result was, you know, you've got some really powerful messages to give. You could be really much more influential if you were able to retrain yourself not to do that. The first thing was being aware of it, actually.
Yeah.
And the next steps were me to go away and practice. I ended up, sounds really haha, ended up videoing myself a few times before doing major presentations, just watching myself doing the cringe. Cringe. And I could absolutely see everything that she was kind enough to tell me about.
Yeah.
And so here I am today, most of the podcast, I've managed not to say it. And that's thankful. You know, I've got nothing but thanks to that individual who took the time, who cared enough to say, hey, if you want to be your best version, stop doing that.
Yeah.
You sound dumb.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was enough to help.
Yeah. But that's exactly the first step, isn't it? How can you possibly expect somebody to change something if you haven't got the bravery to have a conversation with them? But that conversation is had with both curiosity and care.
Absolutely. And I think if you've got good intent in giving that feedback, it's no. It might smart. So, you know, our first thing of getting feedback is a bit of denial, isn't it? And a bit of defense.
Yeah.
But most individuals go away and reflect and think, okay, well, there is enough truth in that for someone to have had a conversation. And if I know that there's trust in our relationship and they care about me, I'm going to get curious about that and maybe lean in myself.
Yeah. And it might well be it leads to another conversation another day, right? Because that curiosity absolutely goes both ways.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about our conversation the other day. I realised we didn't leave it finished. Here's my reflections.
Exactly.
Some people will need a bit of that reflection time, right? So, and it creates, I suppose I see the relationship between a manager and employee as exactly that, a two-way relationship. And there will be the same highs and lows you have in any relationship.
Yeah.
But our ability to be able to communicate well, care about one another, but also challenge, because without challenge then it's boring, and you know, no one wants any of those things either.
Absolutely.
So what a nice story. That's so nice that somebody spent that time with you.
I think so. But let's not forget, feedback's a gift.
Totally.
So, you know, when you talk about that going back again, one person's view of the world doesn't make it true.
No, that's true too.
And so again, if we have enough trust, actually we can come back and maybe challenge. If you take that example you spoke about earlier of someone in the room, it might be that actually when you get curious and underneath the layers, there could be a multitude of things happening. One, which is I'm so scared to talk that when I talk, it comes like, because I have to kind of get myself ready.
Yeah.
It might be actually there's another really strong individual in the team and I don't feel heard unless I do that.
Absolutely.
I didn't realise that then ultimately my behaviours were having a similar impact on someone else. Yeah, that kind of overdrive piece. But actually there might be something else in the system that needs a little bit of feedback to be able to unlock whatever it is we're trying to unlock.
Yeah.
But unless we're having those really honest conversations, how can we get to the root?
We'd never get to it, will we? Because we have to be curious.
Absolutely.
And ask the right questions.
Yeah. And in my experience, it always feels scarier. So when we talk about the scary shit that happens in HR or for leaders, it always seems scarier before we do it. And then actually when we do it, we are, I mean, not that everything's easy. We are dealing with human beings and emotions.
Yeah.
That everything can be worked out and worked through one way or the other.
Yeah.
And so for me, not addressing it is not an option.
Yeah.
It's not that scary. When you create the conditions to have healthy feedback, when your people trust you, when you use something like the core model, which means it's really objective, you know, here's the context.
Yeah.
Here's what I observed.
Yeah.
Let's get curious about that. Here are the results that would be better for you, for me, for us.
Yeah.
And how do I help you with next steps?
Yeah.
It's not that scary. You know, the perceived outcome is nearly always worse than the reality.
Yeah. And yet the potential impact could be enormous, right?
Yep.
To allow that individual to be their best selves, bring their best work to work, and the potential impact then on other people around them.
Yeah.
And for the leader, for the team, because there's a team of people that are also observing certain behaviours in that particular scenario and are looking for the leader to act and change those behaviours to something that's conducive to that high performing team.
Yeah.
Who will have created at some point these are how we're going to work together. This is how we're going to behave. And actually, you know, we all have an opportunity, don't we, to hold each other to account, which is when you really start to see culture shift.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess we would say to those of you that are listening, that have got this kind of gut feeling that you have a conversation that you should be having in the organisation that would help unlock an individual, unlock the organisational culture. You know, how can you position this? How can you get yourself ready to have that conversation? What's getting in your way? And then maybe use the core model, which is going to be in the bottom of the link, to really just think very logically, very objectively about what's the context of the situation here. What are you observing as a result of that? What are the results you want or need for the individual, for the organisation, and therefore what potential next steps, just to help you prep for that conversation. And then, of course, be curious enough in the room to allow it to go where it needs to go.
Yeah.
But we would encourage you to take 5, fill that in, and then be brave enough to lean in.
Thanks so much for listening to the Start Inspiring podcast. I'm Kelly.
And I'm Jo, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.